My wealthy sister offered to pay my debts if I was her surrogate, but when her husband demanded natural conception, I cut them off and fled forever. I'm Anna, 27 years old, female, and if I'm being honest, my hands are still shaking while I write this because I've never said any of this out loud. Not really. People think family drama means bickering at dinner or fighting over inheritance. Mine, my older sister Eliza and her husband Mark asked me to do something that made my skin crawl. And everyone, our parents, our pastor, even Eliza, acted like I was selfish for saying no. But before it turned into a nightmare, there was love. That's the part that kills me the most. Eliza, 32, was my role model growing up. She was the straight-A student, the golden girl who somehow managed to stay cool while also being the responsible one. When our parents praised her, I didn't even feel jealous. I felt proud. She was my big sister. I followed her around like a shadow, borrowed her clothes, cried into her lap when I got dumped in high school. Mark came into the picture when I was 19. He was 28 back then, all charm and ambition. He had this way of locking eyes with you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. At first I admired him. He adored Eliza, he made her laugh in a way no one else could, and when they got married I thought, finally she's safe. She's got her person. But infertility broke them. Over a decade, they went through failed treatments, miscarriages, endless prayers. I watched Elisa's light dim little by little. They adopted 2 boys, sweet, loud, chaotic little hurricanes, and I thought maybe that would heal them. But it didn't. Eliza still had this hollow ache in her voice when she talked about wanting a baby of our blood. So when they sat me down at their kitchen table one night, Eliza holding Mark's hand so tight her knuckles went white, I knew before they even spoke what they were going to ask. Anna, Eliza said, her voice trembling, we want you to carry our child, be our surrogate. I froze. My first instinct was no. My second instinct was guilt, because the hope in her eyes was so raw it almost broke me. They promised they'd pay for everything. Medical, living expenses, even hinted at setting me up financially so I never had to struggle again. Freedom dangled in front of me like bait. And the worst part? I said yes. Not out of excitement, not out of love, but out of pressure. Out of the crushing weight of being the good daughter, the supportive sister, the one who could never say no without shattering someone else's dream. I thought it would be clinical. IVF, doctors, sterile rooms. That was the picture in my head. But I hadn't seen the storm coming, the storm that would rip apart everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty. Hey guys, real quick before we keep going, don't forget to sub and drop a like if you're enjoying the story. And tell me what you think in the comments. I'll feature the best one in the next video. The first time things started to feel off was about 2 weeks after I agreed. Eliza and Mark invited me over for dinner. Roast chicken, candles, soft music. It felt less like a family meal and more like a date. I tried to shake the thought out of my head. Eliza was beaming. Mark poured me wine, and I told myself I was overthinking. But then, after dessert, Eliza leaned across the table, her hands folded like she was about to pitch a business deal. We've been talking, she said carefully, eyes flicking to Mark, about the method. The method, I repeated, clueless. Mark gave me that intense stare of his, the one that used to make me admire him, but now just made me want to crawl out of my own skin. We wanted to be natural, traditional, through intercourse. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because I thought it was a twisted joke. But they weren't joking. Eliza reached for my hand like she was offering comfort, not proposing insanity. Anna, IVF is so expensive and it fails so often. This way it's healthier, more natural, and the child would feel more connected. God intended it this way. I yanked my hand back. You want me to sleep with Mark? The words tasted like poison. Mark didn't even flinch. He said it like it was obvious. It's the best option for everyone. I remember staring at Eliza, my big sister, the girl I used to copy eyeliner tips from, and realizing she was serious. Her eyes were pleading, desperate. Like she wasn't just asking me, she was begging me. I tried to reason with them. What about a clinic? Insemination? There are a million ways that don't involve me, us crossing that line. Eliza shook her head, voice trembling. That's cold. Clinical. We don't want our baby to come into the world that way. We want love to create them. Love. She actually said love. My stomach churned. I told them no. I told them I would only do it through a doctor, through science, not sex. Mark's jaw tightened and Elisa's face crumpled like a child being told Santa wasn't real. And that was the start of the pressure. It wasn't just a favor anymore, it was my supposed duty. Eliza cried in front of me, saying I didn't understand what she'd lost, what she'd suffered. Mark pulled me aside in the kitchen, his hand too close to my waist, his voice low. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I left that night with my head spinning. My parents called me the next day, already somehow knowing about the argument. Mom said, Anna, families make sacrifices. Don't be selfish. Dad chimed in. Eliza's given you so much. Don't you think you owe her this? And just like that, the trap started closing in. The trap didn't just close. It tightened week by week until I could barely breathe. After that dinner, Eliza started showing up at my apartment unannounced. She'd bring groceries, act cheerful, and then slip into guilt trips like they were casual conversation. Do you remember when you were in college and Mark helped you move all your boxes up 3 flights of stairs? He didn't complain once. That's the kind of man he is. That's the kind of man I need you to help me give a child with. It was like she was rewriting history, turning every tiny favor they'd ever done for me into leverage. Mark was worse. He started hovering, texting me late at night with, have you thought more about our plan? Or it'll bring us all closer as a family. His tone was steady, calm, almost businesslike, but his eyes told a different story. Every time I saw him, I felt him watching. I tried to pull Eliza aside one Sunday after church. I told her flat out, I'll do this through a clinic, but not the way you're asking. Ever. Her response? She burst into loud, dramatic sobs right there in the parking lot. People turned to look. She clung to my arm, wailing, You don't love me enough to help me. You're breaking my heart. Mark stood nearby, stone-faced, shaking his head at me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. By the time I got home, my phone was flooded with texts from Mom. Things like, How could you humiliate your sister like that? And, Anna, this is a family duty, not a negotiation. Dad even left a voicemail saying he was ashamed of me. The walls were closing in. Then came the night that still makes my skin crawl. Eliza had invited me for dinner again, claiming she just wanted to talk calmly. I went, stupidly hoping she'd come to her senses. Instead, after Eliza went upstairs to put the boys to bed, Mark cornered me in the living room. He leaned too close, his breath heavy with wine. His hand brushed my arm, then lingered, fingers creeping higher. You're beautiful, Anna. You know this would be easy if you stopped fighting it. I shoved him away so hard he hit the edge of the coffee table. A picture frame of their wedding photo fell and cracked, glass scattering across the carpet. Eliza came running down the stairs, saw Mark holding his side and me standing there shaking, and immediately screamed, "What did you do to him?" I bolted before it could get worse. That night I locked my doors, sat on the floor, and cried until I was empty. For the first time I felt real fear, not just of disappointing them, but of what Mark was willing to do if I stayed within their reach. After that night with Mark, something inside me snapped, fear mixed with anger, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just a misunderstanding. But Eliza and Mark didn't see it that way. They doubled down. Eliza showed up at my job 2 days later. I work front desk at a small dental clinic, nothing glamorous, but I liked the routine. She marched in while I was checking in a patient, eyes red like she'd been crying all night, and announced, loud enough for the waiting room to hear, "Anna, are you really going to abandon me when I need you most? After everything Mark and I have suffered?" Everyone froze. My boss stepped out of his office, eyebrows raised. Eliza just stood there, clutching her chest like she was auditioning for a tragic play, painting me as the cold, heartless sister. I wanted to sink into the floor. Later that night, my parents called again. Dad's voice was low and firm, like he was delivering a verdict. Eliza is family. Mark is family. Your discomfort doesn't outweigh their need. Mom added, "It's not like he's a stranger. It's your brother-in-law, for God's sake. That makes it safe." Safe? That word made me want to vomit. I started avoiding Elisa's calls. I blocked Mark's number. That's when things turned uglier. I woke up one morning to find a note slipped under my door in Elisa's handwriting. "Blood is thicker than your shame. You'll regret this if you keep resisting." And then, the boys, their 2 adopted sons. One Saturday, I ran into them at the grocery store with Eliza. They ran up to me, hugging me tight, and Eliza leaned down right there in the cereal aisle and whispered, "They keep asking when Auntie Anna will help us bring their baby sister into the world. Do you want to be the one to crush them?" Weaponizing children. My own nephews. I nearly broke down in front of the Fruit Loops. The final straw came a week later at church. Our pastor, who I trusted my whole life, pulled me aside after service. He said Eliza had confided in him. His exact words, "Anna, sometimes God calls us to uncomfortable sacrifices. Maybe this is your cross to bear." I stared at him, stunned, realizing even my faith community was being used against me. That night I sat on my bed with my suitcase open, staring at the clothes I had thrown in without thinking. I couldn't stay. Not with Mark circling me like a predator. Not with Eliza turning everyone I loved into weapons. I knew leaving would mean breaking ties. Not just with Eliza and Mark, but with my parents, maybe even my church. But the alternative was staying in a cage they were building around me, brick by manipulative brick. And for the first time I thought, maybe burning it all down is the only way to survive. Update. Some of y'all asked for receipts, and for a while I felt ashamed even thinking I deserved to show them. But you reminded me that being ashamed of getting out of a mess isn't the same as owning the harm they did. So here's where I check back in, and what I did next. First, thank you. 12 people told me to call the police, 100 told me to run, and 1,000 told me to burn a house down. Tempting, not gonna lie. A few of you, the quiet ones, said document everything. That's the comment that stuck with me. Someone else DM'd, record him next time he's alone with you. I was terrified of that idea, but I'd spent nights picturing Mark's hand on me again and thinking, if there's a next time, I want proof. I wasn't doing it to be vindictive. I was doing it to survive. So I started collecting. Not because I wanted to hurt Eliza. I still love her. but because I needed a shield that would force everyone who called me selfish to hear the truth instead of their comfortable version of it. I gathered screenshots, Mark's late night texts. It'll be easier if you just say yes. Elisa's guilt-laced messages. How can you watch us suffer? The voicemail from Dad calling me ashamed. And that passive God's cross lecture from our pastor. I even had the restaurant receipt from the night Mark cornered me. Proof I was there, not making it up. I saved every one. Then I recorded. The next time Mark tried to corner me, at Eliza's house, wine on the table, their boys asleep upstairs, I pretended to be pliable. I let him speak into his arrogance. I kept my phone in my pocket and hit record. He said things I hadn't dared repeat out loud. How IVF was inefficient, how nature would be cheaper, how family owed each other favors. He said plainly that it would be better if there were no lawyers or doctors involved. When his hand slid toward my waist, I pressed the button with my thumb and left. What I did next felt dangerous but clean. I invited the family to dinner, under the guise of trying to reconcile, at the same church hall where Eliza loved to host fundraisers. I told no one else what I planned. I set up my laptop and a cheap projector and with shaking hands made a 12-minute montage. The texts, the voicemail from Mom, Mark's recorded voice saying the thing we'd all been pretending wasn't happening. I added a slide at the end with one sentence. She asked me to carry a child, not to sleep with someone who scares her. When the video started, the hall went quiet in a way that feels like lungs holding breath. You could have heard the humming of the fluorescent lights. For 3 minutes, my stomach wanted to exit my body. Then Mark lunged for the laptop. That's when it became physical, public, and ugly in a way only people who live inside tightly wound families understand. He shoved the table. The projector toppled and exploded against the floor with a crack like a gunshot. Glass and plastic flew. Eliza screamed. Not the soft, practiced wail, a raw animal sound, and pushed Mark back. He ripped his jacket, stumbled into the folding chairs, and started yelling about betrayal and lies. Dad stood up and yelled for order. Mom started sobbing theatrically. Someone called for me to stop. Someone else to explain myself. The boys, two small, bewildered tornadoes, were whisked away by a neighbor. Outside, the chaos continued. Mark's car tires were slashed overnight. I didn't do that. Don't explode my DMs asking how to do illegal things. Their mailbox was egged, and anonymous voicemails started calling me names that I'd never heard them say in person. Neighbors texted me that Mark had been driving around the neighborhood all night, screaming into his phone. He threw a rock through a window of Eliza's garden shed the next afternoon. He escalated. He always escalated when he couldn't control the story. People asked why I chose to humiliate them instead of confronting them privately. Because private didn't work. Because every private conversation turned into a sermon or a performance. Because if truth only lives in whispers, it isn't a truth that changes anything. I wanted their community to hear the words so that the pressure would shift away from me and toward them. I wanted evidence to exist beyond my shaking voice. When all of that carnage faded into the next morning's adrenaline, I sat on my small couch and felt something like relief. But it wasn't clean. Revenge hadn't fixed Eliza's hollow eyes. It hadn't handed me the family I missed. It had unmoored us all and opened a new wound. I knew there would be fallout. I also knew I'd finally picked a direction that wasn't toward compliance. Update. Y'all said run and lock the doors. And a whole lot of you sent lawyer emojis. A few of you slid into my DMs with the exact phrase I needed. Get everything in writing and don't go alone. I listened. This is what happened next. After the projector blew and Mark lost it, the war spilled into the open in ways I'd only feared. He didn't sulk and brood, he performed. The next morning, my phone blew up with screenshots of a Facebook post from Mom. Family is family. Traitors will be forgiven, but not before they learn humility. It was accompanied by a blurry, dramatic selfie of her and Dad outside church. People I'd known since kindergarten started asking if I was okay. A handful offered support. More liked my mother's performative post. Mark weaponized spectacle. He stood outside the dental clinic one afternoon, live streaming, shouting at me like I'd personally stolen his life. He filmed the parking lot and said, loud enough for strangers to hear, that his wife had been betrayed and their boys lied to by their own blood. A neighbor texted me that he'd been circling the block 2 hours before my shift, angling for a confrontation. A woman in the waiting room cried. 2 patients canceled. My boss, embarrassed, asked if I could take a week off. That felt less like concern and more like exile. Eliza, stripped raw by embarrassment and panic, doubled down on the kids. She posted photos of the boys with captions about trust and family safety. Friends who had once hugged me at parties took furtive sides. One of my co-workers, someone I'd lent money to in college, started avoiding me in the break room after Eliza called our workplace to tell a tidy, tear-soaked version of events that painted me as unstable. My small, steady life started showing cracks. Then Mark escalated in a way that made my stomach a permanent, icy stone. He showed up at my parents' house with the boys in the car, snapping photos outside my apartment and sending them to every family group chat with captions like, "Where is Auntie Anna taking our kids tonight?" It felt like stalking by proxy. My phone hummed with texts from Dad. "You're making them suffer." Mom posted a string of Bible verses about obedience. People told me to press charges. Some said the recordings I'd made were golden. Others muttered that taking family to court would ruin me. I sat with a lawyer for the first time because one of you suggested a women's legal helpline in a DM. She listened to the recording of Mark's hand on my waist, read the threatening note from Eliza, and told me to file for a temporary restraining order. I did. The clerk was kind. The judge didn't laugh when I spoke. Mark was ordered to stay away from my workplace and to cease contact. He screamed at the courthouse doors like a caged animal. Neighbors filmed him. A legal record now existed. That legal action changed the tenor of everything. Not like a miracle, but like oxygen returning to one lung. It didn't fix the smear on social media or my parents' public condemnation or the hours I spent sobbing into a paper cup in the dentist office. But it gave me a foothold. The lawyer connected me with a safe house hotline and a therapist who specialized in coercive control. The therapist taught me language, gaslighting, duty coercion, trauma bond. And for the first time I could name what I'd lived. I started small, private revenge plans that were legal, surgical, and emotionally satisfying. I filed formal complaints with the church and the clinic about breach of conduct and harassment documentation again. Thank you, stranger, who DM'd that phrase. I sent the recording to one person who mattered, the pastor's supervisor, because I couldn't stomach sermons being used as weapons anymore. I set up a bank account in my name only, packed a duffel and booked a one-way bus ticket across the country under a different name on the reservation. Leaving wouldn't be a dramatic exit with slashed tires and revenge fireworks. It would be slow, boring, and deliberate. Cash in hand, lawyer on speed dial, therapist at the ready. My heart was still raw, but for the first time in months I could picture a life where my decisions didn't have to be sacrifices made on someone else's altar. I left at dawn. I'd rehearsed how to do it 100 times in my head. Slip out while they slept, leave the cars in the driveway so it wouldn't look obvious, take only what I couldn't replace. But rehearsals never account for the trembling in your hands when the moment actually arrives. Maya, my old roommate from college, 29, female, waited on the corner with coffee and a duffel in the passenger seat. Rachel, the lawyer the women's clinic recommended, texted me a single check-in emoji and the words, "Ready when you are" at 5:03 a.m. I packed slow. Clothes that still smelled like the apartment I'd shared with Eliza for a while, a battered journal where I'd scribbled every cruel text, the recording of Mark that had become my talisman, and the single thing that felt like a thread to the person I used to be, a thin silver necklace Eliza had given me when I was 18, with a tiny moon pendant. I wrapped it in paper and put it in my pocket like an amulet. Outside, the neighborhood was a smear of gray fog and sleeping cars. Mom's porch light was on. Later, I'd learned she'd been watching through blinds. I hugged the boys' stuffed toys that Eliza had left in the couch once. I wasn't taking them. I just needed to feel normal for a second. And I left the key on the mat. No goodbye note. Goodbye wasn't something they'd ever learned how to receive properly. We drove to the bus station like we were running away from a life sentence. Maya sat in the passenger seat and told stupid stories to distract me. She kissed the top of my head once, like she used to when hangovers were the worst thing we faced. Rachel met us there, a calm presence with a folder. She'd filed the restraining order, printed photocopies of everything I needed, and had the courthouse address tacked in her pocket. She'd also alerted the station security that a Mark's pattern, to expect him if he tried anything. Safety in numbers, she said, and cameras. The relief of being almost gone was a dangerous thing. My heart felt like an animal in a trap, so close to escape it could taste the air. I hugged Maya hard, the kind of hug you give before somebody goes into surgery. She whispered, "Don't look back." I wanted to look. I wanted to watch the house shrink and then burn. But I didn't. I stepped onto the bus. Then he arrived. Mark stormed up from the parking lot like a man who thinks rage is a road map. He saw my face, and something I recognized as savage entitlement lit his features. He charged the line where I was sitting, yelling. People turned. A mother clutched her toddler. A teenage boy in a band tee stood up to film. He reached for my duffel. For a second the world slowed, and I could hear every sound. The rubber soles on concrete, the breath of the woman 2 seats over, the staccato clicking of a phone camera. Rachel stood up and put herself between us. Security moved like they'd been waiting for a cue. Mark shoved Rachel. He tried to push past the guard. He screamed their names, Eliza, our parents, like a plea that sounded like a threat. The guard read the restraining order like a verdict and told him to step back. He didn't. He kept advancing until 2 officers had him by the arms. The sound of handcuffs closing was a physical punctuation mark I will never forget. He screamed about betrayal. A neighbor later told me he'd been videotaped throwing something at the house and cursing the sky. They led him away. He slammed his feet on the pavement and shouted until his voice broke. People in the terminal watched, some with pity, some with the giddy voyeurism that small-town spectacles produce. I sat frozen, my throat raw, my hands clamped to that moon pendant until my knuckles ached. On the bus, my phone buzzed with new messages. The adoption agency had called me back after I emailed them the recordings. The pastor's supervisor confirmed a complaint had been filed. The church secretary texted, "Please don't come back to services this Sunday." My parents left 2 voicemails in a row asking me to come home. I didn't listen. Leaving didn't fix everything. The legal wheels were only beginning to turn. Eliza called 3 times that first week. once hysterical, once accusing, once begging, and I didn't pick up. Word spread in a manner that felt like both vindication so on the second humiliation. Neighbors took sides, friends messaged in whispers, and my boss quietly arranged short-term disability for me so I could heal. Revenge wasn't fireworks or slashed tires. I never crossed that line. It was this. Evidence in the hands of people who could act. A legal order that gave me space. The public exposure that meant their story didn't stay tidy inside their living room. I'd wanted to protect them. Once, stupidly. And in protecting myself, I had forced them to face what they had been doing to me. That night I slept on a futon in Maya's spare room, a sound that felt impossibly peaceful after months of being constantly alert. In the morning I started therapy. I opened a bank account in a new city name. I applied for a job that would actually pay me enough to live without asking permission. Each small, dull task felt monumental. A utility bill, a therapy copay, the first night's grocery run in a grocery store where nobody knew our family drama. The quiet revenge, the slow, stubborn rebuilding, tasted sweeter than I thought it would. It didn't erase the marks, but it gave me back days without being watched, a timeline that belonged to me, and the authority to say no and mean it. I'm still angry. I'm still grieving the sister I loved and the family I thought I'd keep, but I can breathe. And for the first time since that dinner in their kitchen, breathing doesn't feel like a concession. A year later, I hardly recognized the girl who sat at Eliza's kitchen table and said yes when she meant no. I live 3 states away now, in a tiny one-bedroom with creaky floors and a balcony that looks out over an alley full of stray cats. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. Every bill in my name, every picture frame hung because I wanted it there. I walk past strangers in the hallway who don't know me as the selfish sister or the one who betrayed family duty. Here I'm just Anna. Therapy has been a lifeline. My therapist taught me how to sit with the guilt instead of drowning in it, how to separate my sister's voice from my own. For months I'd wake up at 3 a.m. convinced I'd hear Mark pounding on the door, or Eliza sobbing on the phone. But slowly the panic faded into something steadier. Peace. Alyssa and Mark, they spiraled. After Mark's public arrest at the bus station, word spread fast in their community. The adoption agency investigated after I forwarded the evidence, and while they didn't lose custody of the boys, they were flagged. Mark's outbursts became harder to sweep under the rug. Neighbors who once worshipped their perfect family started keeping distance. Eliza sent me one long, broken email months ago, a mixture of apology, accusations, and plea. I didn't reply. She hasn't written since. My parents never forgave me. That's the part I grieve the most even now. They chose Elisa's version of events, chose loyalty to the image of family over the daughter who wouldn't play along. I sent them one final message through my lawyer. Do not contact me again. No birthdays, no holidays, no guilt-laden Bible verses. Silence is colder than anger, but it's safer too. The pastor was reassigned after multiple complaints, not just mine. A tiny sliver of vindication. I like to think it means fewer women will be told their trauma is a cross to bear. And me? I'm free in ways I never thought I'd be. I took a job at a small animal clinic. Different field, same front desk role, but with coworkers who actually respect me. I joined a hiking group. I paint badly but often. I laugh with Maya over cheap wine on Friday nights. I even started dating again, carefully, slowly, without apology. There's still rage, yes. There are nights I lie awake thinking of Mark's hand on my arm, Elisa's voice breaking in the church parking lot, my parents calling me ashamed. But there's also mornings where I open my curtains, make coffee in silence, and realize the weight is gone. No one owns my body. No one dictates my worth. When people ask why I left my family behind, I just say this: because staying would have killed me in pieces. Leaving hurt once, but it gave me my whole self back. That's the revenge no one saw coming. Not the projector, not the restraining order, not even the bus station handcuffs. The sweetest revenge is this quiet, ordinary life I built out of the ashes they tried to bury me in. And I'm not sorry, not anymore. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and like it. You can also watch more shocking stories in the playlist.